Hello, my name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. We have reached the 11th installment of Project Poirot today. Whew! I mean, when I say that, we're like a quarter of the way through, guys. Like, this is happening. We're chugging along. But anyway, so the 11th installment is Death in the Clouds by Agatha Christie, featuring, of course, Hercule Poirot. And I think this is also known in perhaps the UK as Death in the Air, same book. And I just want to take a note. I'm not going to hang on to this particular copy because it's paperback and I don't do that. But I do just want to mention that I salute whoever the publisher of this is, which is William Morrow, HarperCollins. Yeah, they actually, I don't know if you guys can see that, they put which series this book is in on the spine, and I wish more people would do this for serialized books from authors who have more than one series. I think that would be so helpful. So nice little just cover design note here. And overall I just think that this is a cool cover, so well done, HarperCollins. Anyway, if you've never seen one of my Project Poirot videos, just to kind of give you some context, I do not do spoilers in this, so if you would like to keep watching even if you haven't read, you certainly can. I'll take the synopsis up through roughly around when we find the body, in this case a little further just because that happens almost immediately, and then, I don't think I give anything away. The only spoiler is that Poirot does solve this, but that's not a spoiler because it's a mystery book and they always solve it pretty much. So anyway, so this book is taking place in 1934, and we start off on an aeroplane with A-E-R-O as the prefix there, and it is a kind of passenger liner called the Prometheus, and it has two cabins. So there's a second class cabin and a first class cabin. We're only really looking in the first class cabin, and it is a little bit more than halfway full, including with our intrepid detective Hercule Poirot, but there's also a number of interesting characters also in the cabin, as there's wont to be around Hercule Poirot, and some of those include Jane Grey, who is a hairdresser's assistant who won £100 in a lottery and gave herself a little vacation. She's on her way back to England. By the way, the aeroplane is going from Paris to Croydon, so FYI there. There is a young, handsome dentist named Norman Gale who is making eyes at Jane Grey. There is a few different countesses or peered people on the plane. So there's Lady Horbury and the Honorable Venetia Carr. They're both there. They don't like each other, but they're sitting together because family reasons. And there is a pair of archaeologists, a father and son, the Duponts. Hercule Poirot is there. There's a doctor. There's a mystery writer. There's a few different servants around. And then last but not least, there's Madame Giselle. Now, Madame Giselle, we come to find out, is basically a blackmailer by trade. She came from nothing, but what she specializes in basically is lending money to people. And as sort of her deposit or her security, she has a whole network of informers who give her dirt on people, and if you don't pay your debt, then she tells your husband or your business partner or whoever what your dirty secret is, and then you're screwed, basically. Now, based on those descriptions, you can probably guess who gets killed, because who sounds like the most unpleasant person? Well, so far from what you know, Madame Giselle. So with literally within the first 5 pages, Madame Giselle dies on the plane. She's discovered dead by one of the stewards, and so we spend the rest of the book trying to figure out exactly who done it. Now, in terms of how she was killed, she's found slumped over, and you potentially could think that she died of a heart attack or something, but they do notice a prick mark on her neck, and there was a wasp in the plane. Hence the cover. And so at first you could think that it was the fact that there was a wasp and she was allergic, but then they also find a little dart next to her with this rare South American snake poison on it, so that might be how she died, possibly. And so anyway, there's a lot of ambiguity exactly as to how she died. Poirot he was there obviously on the scene, so he takes this sort of personally and he makes it his mission to figure out who done it. Poirot starts investigating and he ends up taking a lot of the kind of potential suspects into his confidence because he is trying to get, like, kind of earn their trust and find out some more things about them. So we get to know a lot of the passengers on the plane a lot better throughout the novel, and of course by the end we find out who done it. Let's just start with my kind of like feelings about this book. I have sort of mixed feelings because I do think that this is the first fully mature Agatha Christie novel that we've got. This is, in terms of just her characterization, I should be specific. The characters in this book are just fantastic. And it's not that there weren't great characters earlier on. I kind of mentioned Lord Edgeware Dies was a real upping of her game in that department, as was Murder on the Orient Express. But I think that we can safely say that, like, from here on out, she's really kind of matured in her ability to develop interesting characters with a lot of quirks to them. There's a lot of that in this book, and it makes for a really engaging read because something to kind of think about more broadly is any kind of genre fiction, be it mystery or fantasy or romance or sci-fi, whatever. The way that genres work is essentially they're essentially units within a larger kind of system. So any one mystery, you read it in the context of all the other mysteries you've read, right? So you know, if you've read more than a couple of mysteries, the kind of conventions of the genre. And it's the author's responsibility to take what is a formula, like genre fiction has a formula. It's their job to take that formula and find ways to make it unique to their writing style, to make it engaging for the reader, and for, at the end of it, even if it's not conscious, the reader to kind of compare this particular entry in the genre to all the other books that they've read. So I think that what this book represents is Agatha Christie really coming into her own in terms of standing out from the pack of what makes an Agatha Christie book an Agatha Christie book. And a lot of it not only is sort of like very ingenious plot stuff, a lot of it is character driven. She has really interesting and memorable characters. So in that respect, I really enjoyed seeing the characters. I will say, though, that I ended up giving this, I think, 3 stars on Goodreads, and I originally had given it 4. I think the reason that I did not enjoy this book as much as I did on my first reread is because I have been reading these in order of publication. And really what this book is Murder on the Orient Express plus 3-act tragedy equals this book. What I mean by that is the setup, the premise, is very similar to Murder on the Orient Express, right? You are on like a transportation context, like it's not a train this time, it's a plane. Next time it'll be an automobile, I guess. So you're on some method of kind of confined transportation where there's, in theory, no way in or out. So you have that. So it's sort of like a locked room mystery. Poirot is present on that form of transportation both times. And so in terms of like the plot mechanics, it's got a lot of the same kind of beats as Murder on the Orient Express. In terms of the character dynamics and the types of characters you find, it's very similar to 3-act tragedy, and we know that I did not enjoy that one very much. I did enjoy this book. It's not that I didn't like this. This is sort of like a 3 verging on a 4-star for me, which in my rating system would be a 4 unicorn verging on a 5 unicorn for me. But I think I dinged it a little bit just because if you were reading along with Agatha Christie at the time, I think that you would know pretty quickly who did this. Even if you didn't know exactly how they did it, I think it was pretty clear pretty early on who did this just based on her last 2 books. And for that reason, I kind of dinged it down. That being said, I do think that this is a really good book, and it's one that I would recommend. Like, I would not hesitate to recommend this book to someone. I don't know that it's like a super beloved entry in the Christie oeuvre, but I do think it's like a very solid mystery, one that I would certainly rank above a number of her others. So basically, I guess what I'm saying in terms of my personal response to this, I liked it, but I didn't love it. In terms of like overall themes that we've been developing throughout this series, I think there's a few things to take note of. One, I think this is the first book that has an overt reference to the Great Depression, and that's something that we'll see going forward in the 30s, but this is 1934, and there are specific references to the fact that there are not not America. There's like, what was it? There was an antique dealer who was talking about how he had the British price and the American price, and the American price was lower because they were in the middle of the Depression. And then I think there's also a discussion of, oh, there's no more millionaires, and Poirot kind of says, well, yeah, there are still millionaires. It's just that instead of being like a 3 millionaire, you're now a 2 millionaire, and that's plenty. But anyway, so there's like overt discussion of Great Depression stuff in this book, and I think that we will continue to see that over the next few books. There's also a lot more pointed discussion of psychology in this book, and that is not surprising because in the middle of the 1930s, there was a real rise in public interest in psychoanalysis, and that's always been kind of present in Christie's work, but it's the characters themselves are increasingly discussing that element of sort of like theory of the mind more openly, and I think that's going to continue to be a huge part of the mystery genre in general, but also a part of what Agatha Christie does. In terms of how she discusses moral issues, psychology will get brought up a lot more as we go forward. This is definitely a book also that falls into the what you see isn't always the truth category, because this is another one that's making a lot of overt plays on, you know, you cannot kind of take people at face value, and just because somebody's projecting a certain kind of air about them doesn't mean that you can just sort of take that for granted. We also see sort of the idea of the morally consistent bad guy in this book, and this is something that Poirot does, or Poirot encounters a few times, where there's somebody who we would clearly agree is bad, in this case Madame Giselle, she's a blackmailer, but they're bad in a consistent way, and they're bad with a certain kind of justice about it, I guess, basically. And Poirot's attitude towards those people usually is that, you know, he has a very bourgeois sensibility, so of course he doesn't condone what they do, but he doesn't have the same kind of vitriol as, for instance, he did for, like, Mr. Ratchet in Murder on the Orient Express. Madame Giselle is actually moral, like, is very consistent in how she applies her blackmail. So if you pay your debt back to her, she does not reveal any of your secrets. And I think that there's sort of the attitude of the author that this kind of puts her in a different category than other blackmailers, that she doesn't just use it to kind of squeeze people indefinitely. There's like a specific kind of purpose to the blackmail. And so I think that we're not meant to kind of hate Madame Giselle or anything the way that we really come to resent Mr. Ratchet very quickly in Murder on the Orient Express, just in terms of by way of contrast. I think you have some sympathy for how, like, why she does what she does, and the fact that she's a self-made woman, and also you see that on her death she'd made arrangements that her maid should destroy all the evidence of all the blackmail stuff that she had, so, and her maid in fact does that. So again, I think that we're meant to kind of see her not as just being like totally bad. Like, there's essentially that there's, I think, given some context to her villainy. A couple other things, we really see air travel being an even bigger thing in this than it was, for instance, the first time it was mentioned in kind of a major way was Peril at End House. But by 1934, we have, like, commercial flights that are going back and forth between London and Paris on a regular scheduled basis. And if you compare that to, for instance, like, the mysterious affair at Styles, I mean, at that point, they were barely cars in the story, much less, you know, the ability to have long-distance telephone conversations like we see in this book, or to have air travel, any of those things. So I think there's a huge technological, you can kind of see how much that has pervaded society by the time we get to this book. And one last thing I wanted to mention is that Jane Grey in this book is what I have identified as the Mary Debenham type for this book. She is a very engaging character. She's given a lot of, I think, care in her characterization, probably even more so than a lot of the other people in the book. She's given a couple of different love interests, and I think in that respect, her name is Jane Grey, and she's actually quite similar in a lot of ways to Catherine Grey in the Mystery of the Blue Train. And you guys know that Catherine Grey was one of the only characters I really liked in that book. So she's very, very similar to Catherine Grey, honestly. The only real exception being she hasn't inherited a tremendous amount of money yet. And one thing that we will see in this book, and this I think is an interesting sort of deepening of Poirot's character. He's instrumental in helping her find her kind of happily ever after-ish. And he does that for another couple as well. And you see sort of his romantic side in this book, and we've seen it a few times before, but I think that that's meant to be an allusion to his sort of Gallic roots. I mean, he's a Belgian, he's, you know, francophone, like, romance, all that stuff. And he definitely has a side like that to him. It's not all just about his little gray cells. You really do see in this book that Poirot is not just all brains, he's also kind of a big marshmallow on the inside, especially when it comes to young love. So where would I rank this book? I would probably put it above the Murder on the Links. They're right there together for me. I probably like them about the same. I'll put it above the Murder on the Links just because I think the characterization in this novel is so much better, and I'll put it below the Murder of Roger Ackroyd. But it's a pretty middle of the road book for me in terms of my personal enjoyment. I do think that this is certainly a very solid entry into the Christie oeuvre, so no complaints on that score. Oh, and I probably couldn't put in my little graphic because I was holding up the book. So here's the overall ranking. Enjoy. So I think that's going to do it for this particular entry into Project Poirot. We will keep on trucking next week with the ABC murders, which I know is a lot of people's favorite, or it's just generally kind of a fan favorite, I think. I may or may not agree with that sentiment. You will have to wait and see. If you've read this book, definitely let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all of that information listed in the description box below. And I think that that'll do it. I hope you guys are having a fantastic week, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!